Jake Morrison wiped the sweat from his face as he finished feeding the cattle. The morning sun was getting hot on New Dakota Colony, and he still had work to do before lunch. His wife Lisa was in the garden picking vegetables for their meal. Their life was simple but good on this frontier world. "Jake, come look at this," Lisa called from behind the fence. She was pointing at the sky with a worried look on her face. Jake walked over and looked up. Dark shapes were moving across the blue sky. They looked like ships, but not the kind that usually came to their colony. These were bigger and had a strange design he had never seen before. "Those aren't our ships," Jake said quietly. He felt a cold fear in his stomach. "We should call Ben Taylor." Ben Taylor was the colony administrator. He lived in the main settlement about 2 miles away from Jake and Lisa's farm. Jake pulled out his communication device and tried to reach Ben, but only static came through. In the main settlement, Ben Taylor was already running toward the communication center. Amy Rodriguez, their communications officer, was trying to contact other colonies and the defense fleet. Her fingers moved quickly over the controls, but she was getting no response from anyone. "Ben, I'm getting signals from those ships," Amy said. Her voice was shaking. "They're not friendly. I think they're preparing to attack." Ben grabbed the emergency broadcast system. His voice echoed through speakers all over the colony. "All residents, this is Ben Taylor. Unknown ships are approaching. Go to your emergency shelters immediately. This is not a drill." Jake and Lisa heard the announcement and ran toward their storm cellar. All around the colony, families were doing the same thing. Children were crying and parents were trying to stay calm while they gathered their emergency supplies. High above the planet, War Master Zethkar of the Catharian Empire watched the human colony through his ship's viewing screen. He was tall and thin with gray skin and cold yellow eyes. His people had conquered many worlds using the same method they would use today. "Release the Ravagers," Zethkar ordered his crew. "Let the humans see what real fear looks like." The Catharian ships opened their cargo holds. Huge metal containers fell toward the planet's surface like deadly rain. Each container held sleeping war beasts that had been bred for one purpose: to destroy enemy settlements and break their will to fight. Through our first container crashed into the ground near the main settlement. The metal doors burst open with a loud bang. Smoke poured out, and then came a sound that made everyone's blood freeze. It was a roar so deep and terrible that it seemed to shake the very ground. A massive creature stepped out of the smoke. It looked like a giant bear, but it was 12 feet tall and covered in thick armor-like skin. Its claws were as long as kitchen knives, and its teeth were like white daggers. This was a Ravager, the Catharian Empire's most feared weapon. More containers were landing all around the colony. Soon, dozens of these giant beasts were prowling through the streets. They smashed through buildings like they were made of paper. Their roars filled the air with terror. Amy Rodriguez was still at her communication station, trying desperately to send a distress signal to anyone who might help them. The building shook as a Ravager slammed into the wall outside. Pieces of the ceiling fell around her, but she kept working. "Mayday, Mayday," she spoke into her transmitter. "This is New Dakota Colony. We are under attack by unknown alien forces. They have released giant creatures that are destroying our settlement. Please send help immediately." She managed to send the message just as the communication tower outside began to fall. A Ravager had torn it down with its massive claws. Amy grabbed her emergency kit and ran for the exit as her building started to collapse. Ben Taylor was leading a group of colonists toward the emergency bunkers when they came face to face with one of the creatures. The Ravager was even more terrifying, up close. Its yellow eyes stared at them with what looked like hatred, and saliva dripped from its huge mouth. The colonists froze in fear. Some of the children started crying. Ben stepped in front of them, even though he knew he couldn't protect them from such a monster. The creature raised its claws, ready to strike. But then something strange happened. The Ravager stopped and tilted its head to one side. It made a different sound, not a roar, but something softer. It almost sounded confused. At Jake and Lisa's farm, they could hear the destruction happening in the main settlement. The roars of the creatures carried across the fields, along with the sounds of breaking buildings and frightened screams. "We have to help them," Lisa said, but Jake held her back. "There's nothing we can do against those things," he replied. We have to stay hidden, and hope help comes soon. But help seemed far away. The colony's defenses had been overwhelmed in minutes. These creatures were like nothing humans had ever faced before. They were living weapons, designed to bring fear and destruction wherever they went. As the sun began to set over New Dakota, the Ravagers continued their rampage. But something was different about these war beasts. Some of them had stopped destroying things and were just wandering around. They looked lost and confused, like they didn't really want to be doing what they were doing. War Master Zethkar watched, from space with satisfaction. Soon the humans would surrender, just like all the other species his empire had conquered. The Ravagers never failed to break an enemy's spirit. By morning, this colony would be ready for occupation. But Zethkar didn't know something important about humans. He didn't know about their strange ability to see friendship where others saw only enemies. He was about to learn that some species don't break when faced with monsters. Sometimes they try to heal them instead. 3 days after the attack on New Dakota, Captain Rick Barnes and his Marine rescue team arrived at the colony. Their ship landed in what used to be the main square, now filled with broken buildings and deep claw marks in the ground. Rick expected to find bodies and ruins. Every colony that had been attacked by Catharian warbeasts was completely destroyed. No one ever survived these creatures. But as his team stepped off their ship, something felt wrong. It was too quiet, but not the quiet of death. It was peaceful. "Stay alert," Rick told his 20 Marines. "These war beasts might still be around." Sergeant Mike Cooper pointed toward a nearby building. "Captain, look at that." Rick looked where Mike was pointing. One of the giant Ravagers was lying in the shade of a broken wall, but it wasn't prowling or hunting. It was sleeping, and its breathing was slow and calm. "Is it dead?" asked Private Danny White, raising his weapon. "No," Rick said quietly. "It's just resting. But why isn't it attacking us?" They moved carefully through the settlement. More Ravagers were scattered around, but none of them seemed interested in fighting. Some were sleeping, others were just sitting and watching the humans with curious
eyes. Then they heard voices coming from near the old medical center. Human voices talking in normal, calm tones.
Rick's team moved toward the sound, ready for anything. What they found made them stop and stare in complete shock. Jake Morrison was kneeling next to a Ravager that was lying on its side. The creature's left paw was wrapped in clean bandages, and Jake was gently checking the wound. The beast, which should have torn Jake apart with one swipe of its claws, was holding perfectly still and making soft, rumbling sounds. "There you go, big guy," Jake said softly to the creature. "That cut is healing nicely. You'll be walking better in a few days." Lisa Morrison was nearby, mixing something in a large bowl. 3 more Ravagers sat around her like giant dogs waiting for dinner. When she finished mixing, she divided the food into separate containers and set them down. The massive war beasts began eating politely, taking turns and not fighting over the food. "What in the world is going on here?" Rick called out. Jake looked up and smiled. "Oh, thank goodness. We were wondering when help would arrive." "Are you here to evacuate us?" "Evacuate?" Rick walked closer, still not believing what he was seeing. "Sir, you're supposed to be dead. These creatures destroyed every other colony they attacked." Dr. Kate Wilson came out of the medical center, wiping her hands on a towel. She had been the colony's veterinarian before the attack. "They're not destroyers," she said. "They're victims." Rick's Marines were still pointing their weapons at the Ravagers, but the creatures seemed more interested in their food than in fighting. One of them looked up at the soldiers and made a sound that almost seemed like a greeting. "I don't understand," Rick said. "These are war beasts. They're bred to kill." Kate nodded toward the Ravager that Jake had been treating. "Look at them carefully, Captain. Really look." Rick studied the creatures more closely. Now that he wasn't expecting them to attack, he could see things he had missed before. Their fur was thin and patchy in places. Their ribs showed through their skin. Old scars covered their bodies, and some of them had infections that hadn't been treated. "They're malnourished," Kate explained. "And they've been abused for a long time. When they first came out of those containers, they were confused and scared. They destroyed things because that's what they were trained to do, but you could see they didn't want to. Lisa set down her empty bowl and walked over to one of the ravagers. The creature was easily 3 times her size, but when she reached out to pet its head, it closed its eyes and leaned into her touch like a giant cat. After the first day, Lisa said, we realized they were just hungry and hurt. So we started feeding them and taking care of their wounds. They stopped being aggressive almost immediately. Ben Taylor walked up to the group. He had been helping other colonists care for more ravagers on the other side of the settlement. We lost some buildings and equipment, he told Rick, but no people died. Once we started treating these creatures with kindness, they became protective of us instead of destructive. Private Danny White lowered his weapon. This is the strangest thing I've ever seen. One of the smaller ravagers, probably young, approached the Marines with curiosity. It sniffed at Danny's boots and then sat down in front of him, tilting its head to one side. I think it wants you to pet it, Jake said with a laugh. Danny looked at Rick, who nodded. The young Marine carefully reached out and touched the creature's head. The ravager's tail started wagging like a dog's tail, and it made happy rumbling sounds. Unbelievable, Rick muttered. Amy Rodriguez had been working to repair the communication equipment. She came running over to the group with excitement. Ben, I got the transmitter working again. I've been getting messages from other colonies. The same thing happened at Pine Ridge and Haven Valley. The settlers there tamed their war beasts too. Rick felt like the world had turned upside down. You mean this happened at other colonies as well? At least 3 others, Amy confirmed. The Catharians sent their war beasts to break us, but instead we've been healing them. Kate Wilson was examining another ravager's eyes with a small light. These creatures are highly intelligent, she said. More intelligent than most Earth animals. They understand kindness and they respond to it. The Catharians have been using fear and pain to control them, but that's not their natural state. Lisa had moved on to grooming one of the ravagers with a large brush. The creature was making contented sounds and its eyes were half closed with pleasure. We've been learning their individual personalities, she said. This one here, we call him Buddy. He loves having his fur brushed and he's very gentle with the children. As if to prove her point, 2 colony children came running over. They weren't afraid of Buddy at all. The massive creature lowered his head so they could reach up and pet him. They're like giant dogs, said Marine Corporal Steve Adams. Deadly giant dogs, but still dogs. Rick shook his head in amazement. Wait until headquarters hears about this. They're never going to believe it. Jake stood up and brushed dirt off his knees. Captain, we don't want to leave these creatures behind. They trust us now and we can't abandon them. The Catharians will probably come back for them and we know they won't treat them well. You want to evacuate the war beasts too? Rick asked. They're not war beasts anymore, Lisa said firmly. They're our friends, and friends don't leave friends behind. Rick looked around at the scene. Marines and colonists were now working together to care for the ravagers. The creatures were helping too, using their great strength to move heavy objects and clear debris. It was like nothing he had ever seen in all his years of military service. All right, Rick said finally. We'll figure out a way to transport them. But I have a feeling this is going to change everything about how we fight this war. He was more right than he knew. 2 weeks after the rescue from New Dakota, Dr. Alex Turner arrived at the military research station on Luna Base. He was a xenobiologist, someone who studied alien life forms. The military had called him to examine the ravagers that Captain Rick Barnes had brought back from the colony. Alex had seen many strange creatures in his career, but nothing had prepared him for what he found in the research facility. Instead of caged monsters, he saw what looked like a group of giant pets playing in a large exercise yard with human handlers. Dr. Turner, welcome, said Colonel Nancy Price, the base commander. I have to warn you, what you're about to see will challenge everything we thought we knew about Catharian war beasts. Alex watched as Jake Morrison threw a large ball across the yard. Buddy, the ravager from New Dakota, chased after it with the enthusiasm of a puppy. The creature picked up the ball in his massive jaws and brought it back to Jake, tail wagging. Remarkable, Alex said quietly. How long have they been exhibiting this behavior? Since day one, Nancy replied. We've had animal behaviorists working with them around the clock. These creatures learn faster than any Earth animal we've ever studied. Dr. Susan Clark, the lead animal behaviorist, approached them with a tablet, full of notes. "Dr. Turner, I need to show you something amazing. Watch this." She walked over to a different ravager and held up her hand. The creature immediately sat down. Then she pointed to the ground, and the ravager lay down. She made a circular motion with her finger, and the massive beast rolled over completely. "We taught him those commands in just 3 days," Susan said. "Their intelligence is off the charts. They're not just following orders, they're thinking about what we want and trying to please us." Alex was fascinated. He spent the next several hours studying the creatures, taking notes and samples. Every test showed the same thing. These were highly intelligent, social animals that had been forced into an unnatural role as weapons. Meanwhile, across human space, the war was taking a very different turn than anyone expected. At Riverside Colony, the Catharians had launched their second type of attack. War Master Zethkar was becoming frustrated with the failure of his ravagers, so he decided to try a different approach. This time, he sent flying creatures called Shriekwings. The Shriekwings were like giant bats with razor-sharp claws and a scream that could shatter glass. They were supposed to attack from the air, making it impossible for humans to fight back. But something unexpected happened at Riverside Colony, too. Colony leader Tom Evans was a former pilot who had always loved birds. When the Shriekwings first attacked, they did damage the settlement's outer buildings. But Tom noticed something strange about their behavior. They weren't attacking people directly, just property. "It's like they don't really want to hurt us," Tom told his wife Sarah as they watched the creatures from their shelter. "Look at how they're flying. They're avoiding the areas where people are gathered." Sarah was a wildlife rehabilitator who had worked with injured birds back on Earth. She had an idea that sounded crazy, but might just work. "What if we try to communicate with them?" That night, Tom and Sarah went outside with food and water. The Shriekwings were roosting on the damaged buildings, making soft cooing sounds to each other. When they saw the humans approaching, they didn't attack. Instead, they watched curiously as Sarah set down dishes of water, and Tom laid out pieces of fresh meat. One brave Shriekwing glided down and carefully approached the offerings. It sniffed. The food then began to eat. Within hours, more Shriekwings had joined the first one. By morning, the entire flock was taking food from human hands and allowing people to touch their wings. The news reached Dr. Alex Turner at Luna Base just as he was finishing his research on the Ravagers. "Colonel Price," he said excitedly, "I need to speak with Fleet Command immediately. I think I know what's happening." Admiral Frank Lopez listened carefully as Alex explained his findings over the video communication link. "Sir, these creatures aren't naturally aggressive. They're pack animals. Social creatures that have been conditioned through abuse and starvation to be weapons. When humans show them kindness instead of fear, they revert to their natural, peaceful behavior." "Are you saying we can turn the enemy's weapons against them?" the Admiral asked. "I'm saying we can save these creatures from being weapons at all," Alex replied. "But I need resources. We should start a program to train our people in animal handling. If the Catharians keep sending us their war beasts, we need to be ready." Admiral Lopez thought for a moment. "Dr. Turner, I'm giving you whatever you need. Create a protocol for dealing with these creatures. We'll call it Operation Companion." 3 days later, at Clearwater Colony, the Catharians tried yet again with their third type of war beast. These were called Crushers, massive armored creatures that looked like living tanks. They were designed to smash through heavy fortifications and crush enemy positions. But Commander Lisa Carter was ready for them. She had received Alex Turner's new protocols and had trained her people in what he called aggressive kindness tactics. When the Crushers emerged from their containers instead of running away, the colonists came toward them with food, water, and medical supplies. The creatures were confused by this response. They had been trained to expect fear and violence, not care and compassion. Lisa herself approached the largest Crusher, a massive creature with scars all over its armored shell. She could see infected wounds between its armor plates. Without hesitation, she began cleaning the wounds with antiseptic, The crusher could have crushed her instantly, but instead it held perfectly still and made low, grateful rumbling sounds. Its eyes, which had been filled with rage and pain, slowly became calm and trusting. Within 6 hours, all the crushers at Clearwater had been befriended and were helping the colonists repair the damage they had initially caused. The creatures used their great strength to lift heavy building materials and clear debris. Back at Luna Base, Alex Turner was amazed by the reports coming in from all over human space. "Colonel Price, it's working better than I ever imagined. Every type of war beast the Catharians have sent has been successfully domesticated by our people." Nancy Price was reading the latest reports with wonder. "Dr. Turner, look at this message from the Frontier Defense Fleet. They're requesting that we send them animal trainers instead of more soldiers. They want veterinarians, not warriors." Alex smiled. "Colonel, I think we're witnessing something that has never happened before in galactic history. Instead of defeating an enemy's weapons, we're healing them." The news reached War Master Zethkar aboard his command ship. His intelligence officers reported that humans were somehow converting Catharian war beasts into allies. Zethkar refused to believe it at first. "Impossible," he growled. "The beasts are conditioned from birth to destroy. They cannot be turned." But the evidence was overwhelming. Surveillance footage showed Ravagers wearing human-made armor and working alongside human soldiers. Shriekwings were carrying human messages and supplies between settlements. Crushers were helping to build new defensive positions. For the first time in his military career, Zethkar felt something he had never experienced before: doubt. His most powerful weapons were not just failing, they were joining the enemy. And the strangest part was that the humans weren't even treating them as weapons. They were treating them as friends. Alex Turner finished his report to Fleet Command with a simple conclusion. "Sir, we have discovered that the galaxy's most feared war beasts just needed someone to show them love, and it turns out humans are very good at loving things that others consider monsters." War Master Zethkar stood on the bridge of his command ship, staring at the reports scattered across his desk. 3 months had passed since he began his war against the humans, and nothing was going as planned. "War Master," his aide commander, Vextal approached carefully. "We have received another message from the 4th Fleet. Their war beasts have stopped responding to commands." Zethkar crushed the datapad in his hand. "Explain what you mean by stopped responding." "The Ravagers refuse to leave their transport ships. When forced, they become distressed and make sounds of sadness. The Shriekwings will not attack human settlements. Instead, they fly toward them and land peacefully. Some of our crushers have been seen helping humans repair buildings." The War Master's yellow eyes burned with anger. "This is impossible. Our beasts are conditioned from birth. They are perfect weapons." But deep down, Zethkar knew something was terribly wrong. Reports were coming in from across the galaxy. Human settlements were not only surviving attacks, they were thriving. The war beasts were deserting in massive numbers, choosing to stay with humans rather than return to Catharian ships. On the industrial world of Haven Prime, colony defender Frank Rodriguez was preparing for what intelligence reports said would be the largest attack yet. Zethkar was planning to send every remaining war beast in his fleet to break human resistance once and for all. Frank was not a military man by training. Before the war, he had been a construction supervisor. But the crisis had made leaders out of ordinary people, and Frank had proven to be very good at organizing defenses. "How many creatures are we expecting?" asked Captain Pete Wilson, who commanded the planet's small defense force. Frank looked at his reports. "Intelligence says at least 200 war beasts of all types. It's going to be the biggest assault they've attempted." Dr. Kate Wilson, who had been transferred from New Dakota to help with the War Beast program, was training the newest group of Beast Guard units. These were soldiers paired with domesticated war creatures who worked together as partners. "Remember," Kate told the trainees, "these creatures are not tools or weapons. They are intelligent beings who have chosen to trust us. Treat them with respect, and they will give their lives to protect you." Marine Sergeant Tony Garcia was working with a Ravager named Thunder. The massive creature had been one of the first to defect from the Catharians 3 weeks earlier. Now Thunder wore specially made armor with human military markings. "Good boy, Thunder," Tony said as they practiced tactical movements. The Ravager understood complex hand signals and could coordinate attacks with human soldiers. But more importantly, Thunder seemed to genuinely care about protecting his human partner. On the other side of the training ground, Air Force Lieutenant Maria Santos was working with a Shriekwing she had named Echo. The flying creature could carry messages between units faster than any radio, and its sharp eyes could spot enemy movements from miles away. The bond between human and creature was remarkable. Echo would land on Maria's extended arm like a giant falcon, and the two of them seemed to communicate through small sounds and gestures that no one else understood. When the Catharian attack finally came, it was unlike anything anyone had seen before. The sky filled with transport ships and containers began falling like deadly rain. But this time the humans were ready. "All Beast Guard units, take your positions," Frank Rodriguez commanded from the Defense Center. "Remember, we're not just fighting for our colony. We're fighting to free more of these creatures from slavery." The first containers hit the ground and burst open. Ravagers, Shriekwings, and Crushers poured out, roaring and screaming as they had been trained to do. But something was different this time. Many of the creatures looked around in confusion, as if they didn't want to be there. Thunder and Tony Garcia were positioned near the main landing zone. When a group of wild Ravagers emerged from their containers, Thunder didn't attack them. Instead, he approached them slowly and made soft, calming sounds. The wild Ravagers stopped their rampage and listened. Thunder continued making gentle noises, almost like he was talking to them. Gradually, the other creatures became calm. "What's happening?" Tony asked Dr. Kate Wilson over his radio. "I think Thunder is explaining that humans are friends, not enemies," Kate replied. "The domesticated beasts are convincing the wild ones to stop fighting." The same thing was happening all across the battlefield. Domesticated war beasts were approaching their wild cousins and somehow communicating that the humans meant no harm. The attack was turning into a peaceful conversion. In the sky, Echo and Maria Santos were having similar success with the attacking Shriekwings. Echo flew among the wild creatures, calling to them in their own language. One by one, the attacking flyers stopped their assault and began landing near human positions. Commander Vextal watched the battle from orbit with horror. "War Master, our creatures are joining the humans faster than they are fighting them. The attack is failing." Zethkar could not believe what he was seeing on the viewing screens. His perfect weapons were embracing their supposed enemies. Ravagers were playing with human children. Shriekwings were perching on human shoulders. Crushers were helping to build defensive walls instead of destroying them. "This is impossible," Zethkar muttered. "What kind of species turns weapons into pets?" But the most shocking sight was yet to come. A group of young Catharian soldiers had been watching the battlefield in fascination. They had never seen the war beasts behave so peacefully before. "Look how happy they seem," whispered Junior Officer Kivran. "I have never seen a Ravager wag its tail before." "Silence," Zethkar commanded, but he had seen it too. The creatures that had been tortured and conditioned for war were showing joy for the first time in their lives. Down on Haven Prime, Frank Rodriguez was coordinating the aftermath of the strangest battle in galactic history. Instead of casualties and destruction, they had gained 200 new allies and friends. Dr. Kate Wilson was examining the newly arrived creatures. "Frank, these animals are in worse condition than any we've seen before. They've been severely abused and malnourished. It's going to take months of care to heal them properly. Then that's what we'll do," Frank replied. "We have plenty of volunteers who want to help." Tony Garcia was introducing Thunder to some of the new Ravagers. The creatures were already beginning to play together, like dogs meeting at a park. It was hard to believe these were supposed to be instruments of terror. "Thunder's teaching them how to be pets," Tony said with amazement. "Look at them. They're learning to trust humans just by watching him." Maria Santos landed with Echo after a successful flight with some of the new Shriekwings. "They're incredible flyers," she reported, "and they're already learning our signals. I think they want to help us." As the sun set over Haven Prime, the strangest victory celebration in military history began. Humans and war beasts worked together. to clean up the landing zones and set up temporary shelters for the new arrivals. Children were already naming the creatures and bringing them food and water. The beasts, who had been bred for destruction, were gentle and careful around the smallest humans. War Master Zethkar finally understood what he was facing. These humans didn't see weapons when they looked at his war beasts. They saw living beings who needed help and friendship. And somehow that simple difference in perspective was destroying his entire military strategy. "Sir," Commander Vexital said quietly, "what are your orders?" Zethkar stared at the peaceful scene on his screens. For the first time in his career, he had no answer. 6 months after the failed attack on Haven Prime, Jake Morrison stood in the morning sunshine on New Dakota, watching something that would have seemed impossible a year ago. Buddy, the first Ravager they had befriended, was teaching a group of young Catharian visitors how to play fetch. The alien children, with their gray skin and large yellow eyes, giggled with delight as the massive creature gently dropped a ball at their feet. It was a sound that had never been heard on a Catharian world before, the sound of their young ones laughing. "Mr. Morrison," called Ambassador Carol Hughes as she approached across the field. Carol had been a dog trainer on Earth before the war, and now she was humanity's chief negotiator with the Catharian Empire. "The delegation is ready to begin the final talks." Jake nodded and gave Buddy one last pat. The Ravager rumbled happily and returned to playing with the children. It was hard to remember that this gentle giant had once been considered the galaxy's most feared weapon. The meeting was taking place in the community center that the colonists had rebuilt after the first attack. But this time, instead of emergency planning, they were discussing peace. Representatives from both the human government and the Catharian Empire sat around a large table. War Master Zethkar looked different than he had 6 months ago. The proud cold warrior seemed smaller somehow, and his yellow eyes held something they had never shown before: uncertainty. "Ambassador Hughes," Zethkar began, his voice lacking its former commanding tone, "my government wishes to understand how your species accomplished what we thought impossible." Carol smiled and gestured toward the window, where more war beasts could be seen playing with human children and helping with farm work. "War Master, we never saw them as weapons. We saw them as creatures who needed someone to care." Dr. Alex Turner, now serving as the human scientific advisor, opened his research files. "Our studies show that your war beasts are naturally social, intelligent animals. The aggression you bred into them was artificial, maintained through fear and pain." Catharian Science Minister Ralvesh leaned forward with interest. "You mean they were never meant to be weapons?" "Think about it," Dr. Kate Wilson added. "On your homeworld before they were captured and conditioned, what were these creatures like?" Zethkar's aide, Commander Vextal, spoke quietly. "They were companions. Our ancestors kept them as helpers and friends, but that was thousands of years ago before the Empire began its expansion." "What happened?" Jake Morrison asked. Zethkar looked uncomfortable. "When we began conquering other worlds, we needed weapons. Our scientists found ways to make the creatures aggressive, to turn their loyalty into violence. We thought we were making them stronger." "You were making them suffer," Carol said gently. "And suffering beings don't perform at their best. That's why your war beast attacks kept failing. The creatures didn't want to hurt anyone. They were just following orders because they were afraid." Minister Ralvesh was taking notes rapidly. "Ambassador Hughes, would it be possible for our scientists to study your methods? We have millions of war beasts in our facilities. If what you say is true, we have been torturing entire species for centuries." "More than that," Dr. Turner replied. "You've been torturing yourselves too. Your entire military strategy was based on causing fear and pain. But cooperation and kindness are much more powerful than force." Through the window, they could see Ben Taylor showing a group of Catharian military officers how the colonists had organized their creature care program. The aliens watched in fascination as humans and war beasts worked together to repair buildings and tend crops. "I don't understand," said Catharian General Mordak, one of the harder members of their delegation. "How does showing weakness to enemies help you win wars?" Amy Rodriguez, who had been monitoring communications throughout the war, answered him. "General, we didn't win by being weak. We won by being strong enough to show compassion to creatures everyone else feared. That takes more courage than fighting." Frank Rodriguez, who had commanded the defense of Haven Prime, nodded in agreement. "General, your war beasts are now our strongest allies. They fight harder to protect us than they ever did to attack for you, because they're fighting by choice, not force." As if to prove his point, Thunder the Ravager came bounding up to the meeting hall. The massive creature wore his human military armor proudly and carried a message tablet in his mouth. He delivered it to Tony Garcia, his human partner, and sat at attention like a soldier. General Mordak stared in amazement. "That creature shows more discipline and pride than many of our troops." "That's because he's fighting for something he believes in," Tony explained. "He's protecting his family, us. When you fight for family, you'll do anything." War Master Zethkar had been silent for several minutes, watching the interactions between humans and creatures. Finally, he spoke. "Ambassador Hughes, my empire is failing. Half our war beast facilities have reported complete rebellion. The creatures refuse to fight and become distressed when separated from human contact. Some of our own soldiers are beginning to question our methods." "What are you asking for, War Master?" Carol inquired gently. "Help," Zethkar said simply. "Help us undo the damage we have done. Help us learn to treat these creatures the way you do. Help us become the kind of people who can earn their loyalty, instead of demanding their fear." The room was quiet for a moment. This was not the kind of surrender anyone had expected when the war began. Carol looked around the table at her fellow humans, then back at the Catharian delegation. "War Master, we'll help you. But you have to understand, this isn't just about changing how you treat the creatures. This is about changing your entire approach to other species, including us." "We understand," Minister Ralvesh said. "Our empire was built on conquest and fear, but we have seen that cooperation and friendship are far more powerful. We wish to learn your ways." Over the following weeks, New Dakota became an unlikely center of galactic diplomacy. Catharian scientists worked alongside human researchers to develop rehabilitation programs for traumatized war beasts. Military officers from both species collaborated on new defensive strategies based on partnership rather than domination. The war beasts themselves seemed to understand what was happening. They were gentler with their former masters than anyone expected, as if they knew that healing was more important than revenge. Lisa Morrison watched from her garden as young Catharians learned to care for injured Shriekwings. The aliens were awkward at first, but the creatures patiently taught them how to provide proper care. "It's amazing," Lisa told her husband Jake. "The war beasts are healing their former masters' hearts just like we healed their bodies." 3 months later, the first joint human Catharian colony was established. War beasts, who had once been instruments of terror, now served as workers, companions, and even therapy animals for both species. Jake Morrison, now Director of Interspecies Relations, stood before the colony's dedication ceremony. Beside him sat Buddy, who had become something of a galactic celebrity as the first war beast to be tamed. "Today," Jake said to the crowd of humans and Catharians, "we're not just dedicating a new colony. We're proving that any species, no matter how different, can choose friendship over fear." War Master Zethkar, now serving as Catharian ambassador for beast welfare, approached the podium. "The human species taught us something we had forgotten over centuries of warfare, that true strength comes not from the power to destroy, but from the wisdom to heal." As the ceremony ended, children from both species ran off to play with the war beasts in the colony's central park. The massive creatures, once bred for destruction, now lived for these moments of joy and companionship. Ambassador Carol Hughes watched the scene with satisfaction. The galaxy's most feared war beasts had indeed been tamed, not through force or conditioning, but through the simple recognition that every living being deserves love and care. And in teaching that lesson to their former enemies, humanity had not only won a war but had gained a galaxy full of friends.